let me just begin by thanking you all for being here. This is the first in a series of environmental films, and I think it's a good way to kick off the series because it certainly gave me an awful lot to think about. I tried to look at it from the perspective of a literary critic, to look at the narrative and how it was put together and how it invited us to respond. And it was, for me, it was problematic. It was a fragmented film with a series of separate narratives, beginning with the view inside the factory, going through different stages of industrialization, and always coming back to the impact on China. And at the end, I think the filmmaker tried to make a very clear case for presenting these images objectively, which I don't believe in as a literary critic, but it was very clear that the filmmaker was making a strong effort to represent rather than construct, or to record rather than construct. I think there's a kind of subversion going on from the very beginning for the very nature of filmmaking, which is based on subjective choices. And the title of the film, Manufactured Landscapes, suggests to me a reflectiveness, perhaps a self-reflectiveness that relates back to the editorial choices. The landscapes we see are not simply manufactured by industrialization, but manufactured by filmmakers' choices and by editors' choices to present not necessarily a polemical perspective, but at least the subjective perspective of those individuals who are collecting those information. The perspective that said, this is what we see as important or noteworthy or engaging. And so, without going too much further than that, I don't want to seem to be disparaging the film. I thought it was beautifully done and provocative. But it was, for me, the strength was its complexity, whether intended or not.
Yeah, I was thinking about that a bit, in that I did think it was a wee bit disingenuous for him to keep claiming that he was not trying to comment upon these kind of spaces, when of course he is. He's doing a TED talk for one thing, So I mean, which is about like world changing. You don't get to go up there without world changing ideas. And on top of that, he's really kind of speaking with and engaging in this landscape tradition, this art tradition that's about sort of Edenic narratives of nature, right? And he's presenting another one that is this industrial landscape. And so clearly just doing that is a form of critique in lots of ways. What I was super interested in was my own, and I would love to hear what other people thought, was there's so many tensions going on in this film, and I was so interested how when I saw his images, the still images, they are so beautiful. They're so beautiful that they seem to lose their power in some ways. They're just too beautiful. And that when I was watching the video footage, which was or it seemed like video, I don't know, a little grainier movement, it had a different feel, and it felt much more powerful as a form of sort of representation that was critical. And I thought, can images of waste and etc. get to be just too aesthetically pleasing, so that they actually lose their power? And I just thought they were too pretty. And they lost. I mean, I was thinking about all those people who are, dying of lead poisoning, and whose children are like dying of lead poisoning, and all of that pain that goes with that life is lost in these images.
Well, it's interesting that we're discussing a narrative. I didn't find a lot of narrative actually in the film. I think the film is, I'm assuming, largely meant to evoke an emotional response, which it did with me, certainly. And it's also interesting how Michael was talking about the subjective choices, because it's actually a documentary. It's a film about a photographer. So there's kind of two levels of choices being made. There's the photographer's choices of the stills he's making, and then there's the documentarian's choice of which films to, which photographs to sort of represent him taking pictures of. But my sort of expertise is as a geographer, so I don't have sort of the background of deconstruction or literary analysis or film analysis, but I do study landscape change, and what struck me about this is sort of this, I would say, as far as intensity of land use, he was capturing in those images the most intense sort of land use changes that we've wrought upon the earth. Not necessarily in the sense of how much land has been consumed. I mean, for that, we would have to probably say agricultural land use. But as far as the intensity of land use, and I'm actually surprised, and maybe this is because this was made a little while ago, but the tar sands of Alberta would have been a great place to film as far as just the massive denuding of the landscape and the large swaths of destruction out there. But yeah, so speaking to as a geographer, which is really the only hat I think I can justify wearing, I found it disturbing to, because I deal with these facts and figures all the time, but now here is the actual imagery of the facts and figures. And I think sometimes that's helpful in our work, to not always simply rely on the facts and figures, but an emotional response. And in fact, there's been some writing up of this recently I've seen floating around as far as how the need to bring some more emotion into environmental research, it could be necessary to fulfill it.
That's a great point, Jeff. As you were talking, I was thinking about the psychological cleansing that takes place when you put most of the film in China and show it to a Western audience, and then we're not as culpable. We have a distance that allows us to judge those people and still not feel guilty ourselves. So I thought that's an excellent way of catching out what they're doing.
But Laura, why don't you find a picture beautiful? Those were beautiful.
No, I did find it beautiful.
Right, I know about but you said, but then you felt guilty for finding them beautiful.
I didn't feel guilty. I guess I just, I love them. I thought, oh, I'd put those up in my house, right?
The contrast in it
They're
is
gorgeous.
there.
They're gorgeous. They look like these beautiful 1970s kind of earth art movements. They're just lovely. But that's what I wondered. Like, you go to a gallery and you see them and you think they're lovely, and what else do you think? Do they still work to make us sort of think about these post-industrial landscapes in ways that perhaps we should be thinking about them? I don't know.
Why shouldn't we, though? I mean, what's wrong with a post-industrial landscape? I mean, some people may see some people may see, some people see a valley, right? A soil-strewn valley as as like dirty. Something that needs to be, wow, there's a lot of trees there. We could take those down and make this place a little, we could bring civilization to the wilderness.
Someone looked at this place and they saw a future runway. And someone looked at that, Charles Perry, and saw a future FIU. And so...
Who knows who's looking at it now?
And I, in fact, I do think those are beautiful places. And as an anthropologist, this big dichotomy he's making between pure nature and wilderness, and which is so clear, and then like these human spaces seem unhelpful and boring.
This is something that kind of caught my attention too, in that I think we take these examples of extreme land use, to use your term, Jeff, and one of the standard narratives that we usually place these in is that we should be appalled. That should be our emotional response. We should look at this and say, my God, this is, we're raping the land, we're destroying the earth in order to pull these things out of it. And by making them kind of aesthetically beautiful pictures, that kind of deadens or changes that response of horror or disgust or dismay. And you start saying, well gosh, trash is beautiful. And then maybe one of the ways that goes is then you start saying, well, I don't have to feel guilty about it, because it's another way of looking and appreciating a landscape. It's symmetrical. It has lines. It gets played around with in different ways, it has just generally appealing shapes. So that sense of culpability or that sense of responsibility gets transformed in maybe ways that could be problematic or could be beneficial depending on your perspective by making these kind of uses of the land aesthetic judgments as well, or invite aesthetic judgments.
I think
You know,
the fact
that-
that
I'm sorry.
the artist's images are so beautiful would invite a lot of people to look at something that they may not otherwise be interested in looking at. They might be interested in avoiding, even though they know, they might either consciously or subconsciously know that their actions have effects. They might not want to see that, but because the images are beautiful, it's attracting a whole different demographic audience to be forced to
You're
look at it.
absolutely right, and that's definitely one of the things I was thinking about, this kind of tension about how I felt that suddenly these landscapes that are invisible to most of us are made visible, and that's really cool.
And yet, as Michael said, we are culpable in their creation, though.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We are part of that
I
creation.
keep thinking about that scene in the coal field where the government official does not want them to take pictures, and one of the filmmakers says, "We're going to make this beautiful. Don't worry." And I thought that was just a lie. But from the conversation, I wonder if anybody agrees, if it is,
I thought that was like the key, I was like, yeah, that's what he does,
that they believe it.
What do the
That they
Chinese think
really
of the
feel
finished
that
product?
that's what they're doing.
Does anybody know what the Chinese government thinks of the finished product?
I do not.
I doubt they care.
I don't know. I was actually very surprised that they got away with it. I remember watching 60 Minutes just a few months ago, where they followed this, where they, I don't know who it was, one of the reporters goes to this recycling center where they're using mercury to melt down these motherboards to extract gold. The cancer rate is sky high, and they got jumped by all these people who live there because it's not supposed to be seen. So now this wasn't quite of an expose as that was, but I was very surprised that they talked their way into and out of that situation where they actually got
Yeah,
to go
that's true.
to giant piles of trash. I honestly don't know how he did it.
Well, I would agree with Laura. I think Edward Brzezinski's, as a photographer, his main motivation is to make these beautiful. Outside of his motive for why he wants them to be appealing to people, aside from obviously being well known as a photographer, I'm not sure. But I thought what the documentary did that the photographs don't is take the people that you see in those images, which in his images become part of the manufactured landscape. You can argue that on our flyer with people lined up in the opening scene, they're as much a part of the landscape and therefore dehumanized as the buildings or anything else. But what I thought the film did, which was interesting, and it's coming to a question for all of you, is humanize that by showing in the beginning, when you have that long shot with no voiceover of the factory workers, and then you see them lined up sort of outside, and they're being not berated, but they're being, scolded very sternly for their production, what they haven't been doing correctly. And it's sort of something that's repeated throughout the film when you get these one-on-ones with the actual workers in the factories. You have the one that they ask, "Are you proud of what you do?" And he says, "Well, no, it's a job. I'm doing it for the government." And so my question for all of you, there seems to be throughout the entire film this tension between the Chinese government's desire to grow, right? And there are people in the film who say our lives have become better because of this. But then you also have the other side, which is the reality of the land limits, and then also the reality of the actual impact on life standards, especially of the workers. So what is, I don't know if I can ask you what is the solution, because that's a huge question. But in what ways is China approaching this differently than we did? And in what ways does the film sort of help kind of tease out? Because I feel like in the same way that it was very alien, we can be others and sort of judge the situation. At the same time, there were very real, the moments when they go through making that iron, and then you see it in a recycling heap, that resonates with a Western viewer. Everyone uses an iron. So what ways, I guess, did you see, does this film offer an answer, or does it in any way demonstrate a problem, I guess, that you encounter in your research?
well, okay. Well, one thing that it does illustrate is this choice that in a perfect world nobody would have to make, which is between poverty and poison. So, a lot of that e-waste that's flowing through there is coming from here. So we were
From universities.
Yes, from universities. So we discussed this idea of culpability and stuff. Even though we are not suffering from the disamenities of those landscapes, we have helped produce them. And watching movies like this, we have to kind of confront the excesses of our consumptive lifestyle. And that can be uncomfortable. It's interesting, I didn't get beauty from it, maybe because I go through all these facts and figures, and I'm so used to the bad news, I'm like, yes, these are illustrations of the bad news that I talk about in class. So the beauty was lost on me, but I applaud him for trying, I suppose. But maybe it's just me. I don't know, but for me it was disturbing, because when I see cloud, all that dusty air, I think of what's in it, and people are inhaling it, people are getting cancer. And so it's hard for me to forget about that. When they say, people here are dying before 30, it's hard for me to forget about that and just focus on the photo. But as far as solutions, I don't have any simple ones. So I'll get back to you on that.